أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So inshallah we will continue with 19th word, and this is the 14th droplet.
Okay, so again, let me just read the question again so everybody can hear again. If you ask, why does the all-wise Quran or the scripture not speak of beings in the same way as philosophy and science? So this question is making a kind of comparison and seeing what the difference is, because there is apparently a big difference between how the scripture guide and how philosophy and science guide. So both of them actually are talking to beings, right? So philosophy is also talking to human beings, and so are the scriptures talking to human beings. So the Quran, and then continuing with the text, the Quran leaves some matters in brief form, and some the Quran speaks of in a simple and superficial way that is easy in the general view, does not wound general feelings, and does not vary or tax the minds of ordinary people. Why is this? So this is a question that says, philosophy talks in such a detailed and sophisticated way, whereas comparatively the scripture, or specifically the Quran here, talks in a very simple and kind of superficial is the wrong word. We can say apparent view, right? So it does not hurt anybody's feelings, and it does not seem like a heavy burden in terms of, the minds of like normal, ordinary everybody who is, in their whatever sphere of life they are in. It can talk to everyone in that matter. So why is this? And then the answer that the author says is, by way of answer, we say, philosophy has strayed from the path of truth. That's why. So a very simple, clear answer. We spoke about this last time a little, right? So in our discussion, but I'll just go briefly over it. That philosophy is a very straight answer according to the claim by the author that philosophy has strayed from the path of truth. So there's something called the path of truth, right? Which philosophy is not able to answer, and whereas the scriptures or the Quran are able to answer that path of truth. Also, of course, you have understood from past words. So he's referring to his previous words, or the chapters that this author has particularly written. So this author focuses on mostly belief aspects that also talk to human beings in terms of everybody can relate to them. So and past words and teach that, so whatever the previous words have been teaching are that the all-wise Quran speaks of the universe in order to make known the divine essence, attributes, and names. So the purpose of the scripture is to teach human beings that the one, who experiences the universe, who are in the universe, as we are all here in this universe, we are created beings, right? So it lets us know who that owner, maker, or the one who makes the universe the way it is, and including us, who is the existence giver, right? So what kind of qualities or attributes, and what kind of, how can we qualify that there is such an owner behind all those things? That is, the Quran explains the meanings of the book of the universe to make known its creator. So I think that sentence highlights it, that the Quran explains the meanings of the book of the universe. So the universe is referred to here as a book. So something that has to be read, and that's something that has a meaning, right? So the universe, just like a book which has a meaning, right? Otherwise the book is worthless. If there is no meaning, there's no purpose for the book. Same thing, the universe has a meaning and must be read like a book with a meaning, right? So that meaning definitely points to who that creator is. That means the Quran looks at beings, not for themselves, but for their creator. So that means the Quran looks at beings, not for themselves. So that is a very, very interesting point, actually. I would say that the way the Quran speaks, it does not about the universe or the beings, it does not speak for themselves. Like, it doesn't stay there within the universe, but it takes them to beyond what the universe is or what the universe refers to, right? So not for themselves, but for their creator. Also, the Quran addresses everyone. So it's not only a book for, the intellectuals or the clergy or, Muslims, as the institutionalized words that is used, or it's meant for every human being. Everyone means everybody can relate to it. That's what the message brings. Because the purpose is to let people know who their creator is. That's what the scripture or the Quran is bringing. So again, now he goes to, but philosophy and science look at beings for themselves. So if you look at how philosophy describes the universe or the beings, or what science looks at, it always tries to explain things within themselves, right? So the cell is producing itself, or this, the blood flows, and this is in the human body, and that's still how the blood or the way the human body works. That's it. It's never goes to, how that is, or who the existence giver of that event is or that thing is, right? So it doesn't go to the created aspect of things. It just goes within the things in themselves, right? So philosophy and science look at beings for themselves and address scientists in particular. So we spoke about this in terms of, why scientists in particular, because, for example, if you are studying biology, right, you have to go through certain stages and levels of education to reach a point where you can talk to a postgraduate, doctoral student or something who is in biology, right? So there is a big learning curve, and then you have to work for it and specialize in that particular subject to be able to make progress and make sense of that, right? So in terms of studying the intricacies of how the cells work, right, you have to go through the science courses and understand how the human body is, and then you can reach to the particular cells and try to make sense of how those cells are actually working, right? So and it does scientists in particular, in which case, since the all-wise Quran makes beings evidences and proofs, the evidence has to be, again, superficial, or I would say apparent or easily viable, right? So that's what that means. So the evidence has to be easily viable, it has to be apparent, so that evidence will be quickly understood in the general view. So one does not need to any sort of specialization to see what the evidences and proofs are in the universe, right? Because it just points to that all these evidences are referring to who their maker is, who the creator is. Just like it's so easy to kind of understand, just like you would say your cell phone or your computer has a maker, a manufacturer who made that. Those particles of the computer or the phone cannot just come together randomly. We always say, yeah, this is made by this particular company, that phone is made by some other company. But then when it comes to the universe, I don't know what happens that we don't question and see that, yeah, there must be a maker behind that. So in which case, I'm reading again, in which case, since the all-wise Quran makes beings evidences and proofs, the evidence has to be apparent so that evidence will be quickly understood in the general view. And since the Quran of guidance, so Quran is a guidance, addresses all classes of men, the ordinary people, which form the most numerous class, want guidance, which is concise, with unnecessary things being vague. So the ordinary class of people, the most numerous class, want guidance, which is concise, with unnecessary things being vague, and which brings subtle things close with comparisons. So it talks about subtle things in the form of comparisons. And I guess this is what the author will go in the next paragraph. And which does not change things which in their apparent view are obvious, into an unnecessary or even harmful form, lest it causes them to fall into error. Okay, so let me read the final phrase again. And which brings subtle things close with comparisons, and which does not change things which in their apparent view are obvious, into an unnecessary or even harmful form. So things that are apparent and obvious they're not made complicated for no reason or even harmful form, lest it causes them to fall into error. Okay, so this was the summary or review of the paragraph we did last week, right? So I don't know, anybody or Birkan, you want to say something, or are we going fine so far?
So one point, so the first thing he talks about when comparing the Quranic wisdom with philosophy or science, he says, all-wise Quran speaks of the universe in order to make known the divine essence, attributes and names. That is, it explains the meaning of the book of the universe to make known its creator. I guess this is a very important point. We discussed this before, like in several occasions. I remember we also spent a lot of time during the last retreat in Ohio. Since retreat is getting closer, I'm making a reminder. And so the things being created, I guess this is the very important and fundamental difference between Quranic wisdom and all other wisdoms. Things being created, when you start with this observation, when you start with this, let's say, confirmation, everything changes a lot. Because your explanations or your understanding, the purpose of your explanations or purpose of your understanding will change. So when he says, for instance, on the contrary, philosophy and science look at things in their name, or what he says exactly, the Quran looks at beings not for themselves but for their creator. Philosophy and science look at beings for themselves. So again, this is a big and fundamental starting point, like a fundamental difference, because when you restrict yourself, when you limit yourself to look at things at them for themselves, you restricting yourself to understand the book, for instance, only in terms of the letters. Like whatever you get out of the book, it has to be about the letters. Because whenever you talk about the ideas, for instance, they are not there in the book. So you cannot talk about the ideas, or you cannot talk about the author. Therefore, you cannot talk about the ideas or, let's say, the art of the author, because you are confined with the letters and their properties. So whatever you see there, you try to attribute to letters, or the paper, or the ink, whatever you see. So this is what today, I'm not sure if it is still a popular term, but today the people use the term natural, or natural philosophy, natural science. So which means everything has to be limited within the concept of nature. Like how whatever explanation you come up with, it has to be within the nature. You have to use only things to explain things. So again, this is a very big difference. I guess the world view is completely different. Just like, again, reading a book, just in terms of the properties of the letters, versus reading a book as a book. Like trying to understand something from book, trying to understand what author is telling you. So that's the reason, I guess, the author, again, when he talks about the Quran, he says, Quran explains the meaning of the book of the universe. So seeing the universe as a book is already a fundamental difference. Because when you say universe is a book, that means it has a meaning, it has a purpose. Also, it's trying to convey something to you. So book by itself, it's not nothing. That doesn't mean anything. Book becomes a book when there's a reader. So when you see universe as a book, that means you also inserting yourself into the equation. You also accepting that you yourself exist. You have your consciousness, you have your understanding, you have a relationship with the universe. Universe is there so that it tells you something. So all these tiny assumptions, or all these tiny, let's say, not assumptions, but tiny details, I guess make things very, very different. Seeing universe as a book and saying that I will study universe so that I will know the author. You already in another realm. Like there is no even comparison between such a worldview and another worldview, as he says, that he called philosophy or science, in which things exist by themselves, for themselves, without any author and without any reader. Even like to me, the compares the author when he says the philosophy has strayed from the path of truth, it sounds a little aggressive, but I think he is even being nice, saying that, I'm comparing them. Because to me, there is no even comparison. Like between book and a bunch of letters, there's no even comparison. So yeah, that's what I said.
One thing I just wanted to highlight a different point that kind of stood out to me in this passage. And I was kind of discussing it with someone else earlier today, is that in at least philosophy, right, clarity is so emphasized, being clear in your writing. But despite this emphasis on it, they construct this vocabulary, and those that do not partake in that vocabulary or are not familiar with it are completely alienated from it. So even though, they may be talking about issues that they see as relating to some sort of truth, right? It becomes so sterilized from, I would say, the human element or the human experience that it isolates anyone else who has not infinitely specialized to that degree. And in that, I think, at least nowadays, there's so much conversation around privilege and how language itself can be examined in terms of which population it privileges and which population it kind of does not privilege. And I would say that, accessibility in language plays a big part in this, in that, just in this, I guess, comparison, if you will, there's almost the only prerequisite to observing the language, if you will, of the universe is just being human, almost, just using your faculties. And in that, it does not discriminate against any particular group, or it does not privilege another group over another. And I think in that, it really distinguishes itself in terms of making it itself so accessible, which is just a very stark contrast with the disciplines that it's talking about here. So I thought that was also just something that, is always vied for in fields of philosophy, but ironically enough is completely on the other end of actually achieving that goal.
I guess this is really important. It's reminded me all these verses and also the hadith narrations from Prophet that, we always say in Islam or in Quran, all people are equal. And I can, for instance, take it as like a politically correct message, right? As if it's a political message, or as if it's let's say, a social message, saying that, you should be nice to each other, you should treat each other justly, and so on, which is true. But I guess it's also telling us something more fundamental, more, since we're studying philosophy, more maybe ontological, right? It's talking about saying that, no, you are equal, like in every aspect, in every respect. Like you have all these faculties. And if you are studying the universe, you should somehow reach or you should be able to have a platform that you can understand each other. If you cannot, that means you somehow strayed from the path. If other people cannot understand you, or if you cannot understand other people in the universe, I'm not talking about just, when I say understanding, it's not, you don't have to agree on something. But if the truth only true just for you as an isolated being, that means you're missing something about the universe. I don't know, these are, let's say, untamed thoughts. Not sure how much of it right, how much wrong, but anyway.
I just have another point to add along the same idea, reiterating the same point. I think the way a certain text approaches its audience says a lot about who its audience is. So if there is a biology book and you don't know anything about biology and it's not a beginner biology book, it's not pertaining to you. So I think in that respect, since it's using the universe as a like everyone has access to the universe in the sense that we all see the sun, we breathe oxygen, like on a very fundamental level. So I think the stark contrast that Ashna was referring to, assuming I understood what she was saying correctly, is that everyone on a human level has access to this sort of fundamental basis. And one other thing that came to my mind, because of perhaps what I preoccupy myself with, was like in certain 3D animations or even animation in general, it's made for kids, but there are adult jokes in there. So it kind of has this inclusive sense of like you can watch it with your kid and just laugh just as much as they do, and you will get other meaning that the kid doesn't have access to, perhaps. But it's inclusive in that the kid receives some sort of pleasure or information to the level that they're trained, and you also receive some sort of other information or message from that animation based on your level of understanding and experience. So I think in a way it's like an animation. Of course, perhaps the comparison is not suitable, but I think on a very basic level, in that it speaks to each of its audience based on their capacity, and the universe is such a fundamental part of our physical existence that everyone has access to it.
Yeah, that actually reminds me when I was in high school biology, and our teacher drew. We got to the part where we were talking about neurology and neurons. And the teacher just drew one neuron coming from the body up to the brain, and he called that an afferent neuron, and then he drew one circle neuron in the brain, and that was associative neurons, and then one efferent neuron back out to the body. And he told us that was oversimplified, but you get the picture. And from that point on, I was hooked. I needed to know more, but it was enough for that moment, So it's kind of, I like that point you just made.
thank you for sharing that. Anybody else wants to share anything before we move on? Okay, so for example, the Quran says about the sun is a revolving lamp or lantern. So the sun is a revolving lamp or lantern. For the Quran does not speak of the sun for itself, right? Just the sun, and that's it, talk about the sun itself and its nature. But because it is a sort of mainspring of an order and center of a system. But because the sun is a sort of mainspring of an order and center of a system, and order and system are mirrors of the maker's skill. All right, I don't know if that made sense. Let me read that example again. So for example, when the Quran speaks about the sun is a revolving lamp or lantern. For the Quran does not speak of the sun for itself and its nature, but because the sun is a sort of mainspring of an order and center of a system. So there's an order and center of a system. And order and system are mirrors of the maker's skill. So mirrors being, so whatever is just like in a mirror, an object is reflected, right? So whoever is the maker of that sun and this order and system, right? That's like a reflection of what that kind of work or arrangement is, the way the sun is revolving, right? So it highlights or it acts as a leeway or it says mainspring or a jumping board that by looking at this order and system of the sun to know who that maker is. So let me continue and then we can come back to it. So the Quran says the sun runs its course, right? So this is from the Quran chapter 36 verse 38. The sun runs its course. And that is the sun revolves through calling to mind the orderly disposals of divine power in the revolutions of winter and summer, and day and night, with the phrase, the sun revolves. The Quran makes understood the maker's tremendousness. So the Quran makes understood the maker's tremendousness. Thus, whatever the reality of this reality of revolving does not affect the order, which is woven and observed, and which is the purpose. Thus, whatever the reality of this revolving, it does not affect the order. So this reality does not affect the order, which is woven and observed. So this reality of revolving is observable, and that's how it's woven in the order. That's how it works. And which is the purpose. So the purpose of why the sun revolves around this, makes the revolutions. So the Quran also says, and set the sun as a lamp. This is Quran chapter 71, verse 16. Through depicting through the word lamp, the world in the form of a palace. So the sun is, and set the sun as a lamp. So the sun being a lamp. So through depicting through the word lamp, the world in the form of a palace and the things within it as decorations, necessities, and provisions prepared for man and living beings, and inferring that the sun is also a subjugated candle holder. It makes known the mercy and bestowal of the Creator. So through depicting through the word lamp, the world in the form of a palace. So when it says the word lamp, that's the world in the form of a palace, and there's a lamp in that palace, and the things within it, in this palace, as decorations, necessities and provisions prepared for man and living beings. So whatever you in the universe or in this palace are decorations and necessities and provisions that are prepared by someone. They did not just come by themselves, but there's a conscious being behind this preparation and is specially prepared for man and living beings, and inferring that the sun is also a subjugated candle holder. So this verse infers that the sun is also a subjugated, it is under the command of its maker. It does not have its own will or consciousness to actually set itself as a lamp. So the sun makes known the mercy and bestowal of the Creator. So by looking at the sun, we can know who the maker is and what, how we benefit from the, like science will describe all the, if there was no sunlight and how all this vegetation and all these seasons and everything that we experience in the way this universe is functioning would just not work. Right? So, it is out of the mercy and bestowal of the Creator that this whole order is set up. So now look and see what this foolish and prattling philosophy says. So this is how the philosophy describes the sun. The sun is a vast burning liquid mass, right? A description that sun is a vast burning liquid mass. The sun causes the planets, so the sun is causing the planets, as if the sun knows what to do, right? It has the will, it has the power, it's free, left on its own. So the sun causes the planets which have been flung off from it to revolve around it. The sun's mass is such and such. It is this, it is that. It does not afford the spirit. So this explanation does not afford the spirit the satisfaction and fulfillment of true knowledge. Just a terrible dread and fearful wonder. Yeah, it is amazing. That's right, the sun, but it doesn't have any impact on the human being in terms of the human's feelings and being satisfied that this is somebody who is communicating with me, just like as the previous paragraph was saying, as a book, that there is something a meaning that this particular event is referring to. Right? So it connects you to who the creator of that event or that sun and revolution is. But the way philosophy is describing is just pure description. And that's why the author said, does not afford the spirit the satisfaction and fulfillment of true knowledge, just a terrible dread and fearful wonder. So it does not speak of it as the Quran does. So philosophy does not speak of the sun as the Quran does. You may understand from this the value of the matters of philosophy, whose inside is hollow and outside ostentatious. So do not be deceived by philosophy's glittering exterior, and be disrespectful towards the most miraculous expositions of the Quran. So here is like a pure live example that everybody can observe and see, right? Although we don't really focus or pay attention to what is happening in the universe because we are all, involved with things in our lives or like I have a job and I go there, but then everything in the universe is calling me. There's a meaningful message being displayed in front of me. And as a human being, I have to observe. That's what I have. I have all those tools and qualities within me to observe that, yeah, there is such a thing that is the sun that is, we see that during the daytime. But who is setting all this up? Who is making this? So this is the missing part that, philosophy would never venture into, right? There is no way to know that there is a merciful one behind this setup. Like, so with the sun, you see that all those, there's the heat element that every human being needs, science would say vitamin D and all those things. So, but then this, the philosophy or science would not really tell you, would not really point you that there is mercy in the existence of the sun, right? There's no way. I've never read any book. They will say, yeah, it's grateful. Yeah, we're thankful that, yeah, this sun is, or the mother nature is doing that, or the one who gives order. There's no way the science would talk about like the way the order is so meaningfully set up in this universe. Right. And that's how, our human side, is looking for that satisfaction. If things are working on their own within themselves, that doesn't put me at ease. It's like, whoa, the things are just randomly happening, and I don't know when this thing will happen or that thing will happen. But if we know that there's a conscious being behind this order and everything is set accordingly in a very meaningful and purposeful fashion, yeah, then my spirit definitely gets satisfied with that. And with that, I will pause and hear anybody else who wants to talk. Faraz, are you there?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm here, and Isa is here with me too.
Hi.
Okay, hi. So thank you, Asim. Thank you, everyone. What seems to me is that in this, just sticking to just this text that we are reading, it seems very straightforward to me, to be honest. It's, if we, what my feelings, I'm just sharing my feelings right now, that there's the forest, and I don't want to miss the forest for the trees. We can kind of take apart every sentence and, kind of go into it, and that certainly one can do. But I also feel like there is the larger point, which is not intellectually complex. It's actually very straightforward. And I think what makes me pause is, why am I captured? Is my attention captured by the straightforwardness of this argument? Why or why not? And mostly I'm thinking, why may my attention not be captured very deeply by this very straightforward point? What it's saying, science talks about things for themselves and gives the example of the sun, and Quran, or we can say anything that is revelation, we call it revelation. What is going to reveal is the names and attributes of the maker of the thing, sun or anything else. Simple enough, the difference. So what is worth, why should this difference between science and Quran capture my attention, or why does it not capture my attention? What is the bigger point here for me? And I think in so many words, what you guys have already said, and I'm just repeating it really for myself primarily, that it seems to me the human beings look for, this text to me suggests that the human beings look for knowledge for their benefit. They go after looking for what they think will benefit them and will be good for them. And it seems that when we look at myself, when we look around me, what I see when I want to know things, so because I think knowing things is better than not knowing them, I find myself, two ways of knowing things, or two ways I can know them, more intellectually, or focusing on the ideas, which is philosophy, and sometimes focusing on the things, the material aspect of the world, which we call science. Science studies biology, the natural sciences, and so on. Philosophy studies the ideas and things again, but something about the world that we think is good for us to know and benefits us, and it is good for us. And why? And so I guess the challenge is, insofar as I am satisfied with this picture, insofar as I think that I don't have any problem yet in considering my pursuit of knowledge to be valid, and my pursuit of knowledge in the way that I pursue it is good for me, adequate, maybe with the word, satisfactory. Insofar as I feel that way, what this text we just read is saying doesn't capture my attention. It's like a text that's saying, okay, if you really want to know about the things that will, for themselves, then that's science. And it, seems like he's saying, well, that's not good, but it's not clear. It will not be clear to me if I'm satisfied with in my framework, like I said, why that is not so good. Why do I need to bring in the maker? And so, and it seems to me like the larger point here can get lost, because when we feel dissatisfied, in my life, I didn't encounter my dissatisfaction with the knowledge of the sun as a burning gas balloon or something by itself. Like when I first was told this idea about the sun, my response was not that, oh, wow, that is not satisfactory to me as a human being. I don't know if you had that reaction, maybe you can share. My reaction, I hardly remember reacting in any way at all to being described, water as H2O, and it reacts with something else and becomes something else. Okay, I know. These things by themselves did not reveal their falsehood, so to speak, as the text seemed to suggest, that when things were being talked about themselves on their own. My problems started when the person that I really loved didn't love me. And when things that were happening in my life, affecting me emotionally and psychologically, not in my control, things I desperately wanted to control, not in my control, things that I liked and loved going away from me, not knowing the future, not knowing how things will turn out. Those are the kind of things, that made me feel dissatisfied. Not that the sun was described as so many miles from the earth. And so I think when I come to the matter from that angle, then I can see, okay, maybe this text, the larger point it's making is, to me, is that Faraz, you had a conception of order that is accidental. It just happened to be orderly in some ways, but you had no security at all that this order is deliberate, or that there is someone or something who is in control, and so everything was fragile. It just happens to be that it's going my way, things are going my way, that I don't have cancer, that my mom, is alive, or my dad has a job, or that bills get paid. These are all happens to be this way. And the sun happens to be so far away, so enough sunlight is coming, things are working, okay, good enough. So it was this, taking this order for granted But being human being, the order, this taken for granted order, was so fragile and had no foundation, no basis, that perhaps was the cause of my, describing things for themselves becomes dissatisfactory, because the order that is assumed to be there as a fragile, chance, random, blind, unknowing thing, which at any moment can turn anyway, and that in so many ways, as those things start to manifest in my life, I consider disorder everything that is not according to my liking. I feel it's disorder. I feel it's not in order. So this text, I feel like, just to cut my long spiel short, I'm just thinking out loud, and I apologize for my random thoughts, but it seems to me it's saying, look, either you can try to make the world conform to your ideas, which is, what you think is good, what you think is good for you to know, and try to live it that way. Try to live by philosophy and science, which is, to me, like getting to know things in a way that human beings say, we will decide how they are beneficial for us. What is beneficial in this knowledge for us? And the Quran, or the Revelation, challenges that, and it's a challenge not easy to accept unless I really am dissatisfied with, or ready to recognize the dissatisfaction with my idea of what's beneficial to know. It challenges in saying, either you can try to make the world conform to your ideas, in which case what the order that you will construct out of what is happening will have no foundation, no basis, no security in that it will work according to how you desire or want. Or you can listen to revelation that is going to speak of an order, speak of that same order in a way that will address those anxieties and satisfy you. But you will have to give up or set aside your claim about what's important to know, because I will say, no, what's important to know is how far the sun is from the earth, because then we can, grow crops a certain way. Well, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but we can find out, and these are practically useful things, and they're good for us to know. And that's what we call progress, and that's what we call, we and the Quran will say, yes, it's good for you according to your criteria, what is good, and now you gained the knowledge. You said, I'm going to prioritize this knowledge of how big the sun is. And that's what's good for me to know. And now you are left with an order that is really just simply happens to be this way. And you assume it. And as it manifests, that understanding of the taken for grantedness of this order, as it manifests in your emotional, psychological, personal life, you will see that it doesn't help you to know how far the sun is from the earth when your father loses his job, and when a friend dies, or a dear one is diagnosed with a disease. It won't help you. It will not be good for you. And so you can either try to impose that on the revelation, and according to that criteria, say revelation doesn't tell me something useful, or I can listen to the revelation as telling me something useful, in which case I have to set aside my claim about my way of knowing things has been very useful. So I guess the point is, as long as I am still committed to that point, that my way of knowing things is useful, is adequate, I think the larger point this text we read is making will not capture my attention. I'm stopped there. I'm so sorry for my long-winded comment.
Thank you. That was really beautiful. like exactly how, like what is that information gonna do to me? Like, how far the sun distance is. I'm gonna die, and what will that kind of knowledge or information help me with? Right? You were giving example. I like that. So that's how at the philosophy and science, they just keep pushing all that, information. And I like the way the author mentions it, that clear distinction on how philosophy and science describe about the sun. As you said that, what the distance is, and this is how, it, the burn rate or whatever, this is the measurement, and all those numbers and calculations, all those are just mentioned. And you have to be like, I can be, yeah, wow, that's amazing. But then again, it doesn't help my human side, my satisfaction that, knowing that, yeah, this is all, this whole order is arranged by someone who is also my maker, right? So whoever is taking care of this is also taking care of me. And that death is not something I have to worry about at all, because I know that all those stages are part of an order and are given existence by a being that is an absolute source. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else who wants to comment or add anything?
So there's this, at the beginning of Surah Baqarah, there's also this verse which says, the unbelievers criticize Quran saying that, isn't God ashamed of giving an example of a mosquito? So I guess this attitude is still there.
So can you repeat that again? A little louder.
So there's this verse which says, the unbelievers are challenging, saying that, isn't God ashamed to give the example of a mosquito? Why coming up with such an example, as if it's something to be ashamed of? Like if you are speech of God, you should be talking about something at least slightly higher, or maybe much higher than what regular people will talk about. What is the matter by giving the example of mosquito? So I guess this attitude is still out there. I mean, you might be a person who considers Quran as a guidance, or maybe the person might be a total unbeliever which is criticizing the Quran. So I guess the point in here is, since the tendency nowadays is people are using this complex language, as was discussed before, to explain the phenomena that is being observed in full detail. If the text, which claims to be the speech of God, comes and speaks very basic things, it really makes you feel like, well, maybe this was an outdated text or something like that. So, because it is now competing with scientists, or this very full detailed explanations. So I guess this part is really trying to address that. For your problems, for your human problems, what do you need? And as I understand from Faraz's saying, so for my problems, to solve my problems, do I really need full detail of things which doesn't say anything about, it doesn't touch my problem at all, but gives a full description of what's going on in front of me without touching the real matter? Or some example or some approach from Quran with a very maybe simple example, but it really solves the problem. So I guess it very much depends on how I am taking it, and in which sense I am looking for an explanation. Am I looking to explanations for amusement, or am I looking for explanations to solve my problems? I guess most of the time we might be approaching problems for amusement. And what I mean by amusement is, there are those 3-5 minute videos in internet that comes to you. You just watch it not to solve a problem. You watch it for amusement. And sometimes it gives you 5-minute short facts, whatever. What's the point of learning short facts about, I don't know, the height of Mount Everest or things like that? It is sort of an amusement. So this is how we eventually start taking it. But when it comes to Quran, if I am cognizant of my problems, as far as was saying, then I will look for answers to that, and then I will realize that those amusing things are not really solving my problems. Then maybe I would make sense of the answer in here. Otherwise, I will really feel like, what's the point of giving the example of mosquito in the speech of God? It doesn't really make sense. It should at least have been talking about DNA.
At one point I want to add, so when we talk about how it helps me, or how it solves my problems and so on, or how I can benefit from it. So personally, I think even these questions themselves are so foreign to us. Like when we say that, okay, what is the point of this, or how it helps me, how it suits my pain, this is the basic, I guess, the way I see it, at least, this is the crux of this Quranic wisdom we're talking about. Because such question is not there when you look at philosophy or science. How it helps me, yes, I mean, we hear some scientists on the TV talking about solving the human problems and so on and so forth. But as a science, as an enterprise, there is no such question of like how it solves my problems, how it suits my pain. Even this question is a Quranic wisdom. Because Quran, as a revelation, comes and tells me that whatever you see around, they are for you. Like everything created for human being, right? This is what we believe, let's say, what we say. And this is what I understand from this. Everything created for me, meaning whatever you study, there must be something in it for you. It is there for you. It is not there for itself. I didn't create sun so that it revolves around with such a mass, such a speed, and so on. I created sun so that it helps you with your problem with your father. So looking at the things with such an eye is the Quranic wisdom itself. So I guess why I'm saying this, because we shouldn't take it like everybody trying to find, what is good for ourselves or what is good for themselves. But some of them are taking wrong path, some of them taking right path. I guess the difference starts from the beginning. When we talk about the science and philosophy, looking for things for yourself so that it helps you, it's not there. On Monday, I was listening to the lady. She's the president of National Academy of Sciences in US. And one of the, let's say, representative of the scientific enterprise. She was talking about trust in science, whether it's decreasing, increasing, staying same, or why or how people must trust in science and so on. There she said, like everything she said was amazing, quote unquote. She said, like there are two worlds in which we scientists live, and we study things by, the usual stuff they always say in textbooks, like by discarding ourselves and discarding other people as well. So we study things for their sake. But people, on the other hand, regular people, want us be benevolent. Is it benevolent? Like caring about others, or want us also benevolent and understanding. She said they want us to understand their problems, approach them with such an attitude. And she said, this is the problem. Like, this is why we have this trust issue and so on. But we should learn have to, speak people in that way, have to deal with their problems. And so this idea of what is in it for me, or how it will help me, is so foreign. It's not like, again, like I'm highlighting, it's not, everybody asks the same question, but some of them give the wrong answer. No. Only Quranic wisdom tell us you should ask this question when you look at the sun. And yes, I agree, like most of the times we are not disappointed or dissatisfied when people tells us, sun has such a mass, or it revolves with such a speed. But I guess the bigger point is it also doesn't satisfy us. So when something doesn't satisfy you, it doesn't mean you are dissatisfied. You're just neutral, you don't care. But Quran says being even neutral or not caring about the sun is just a waste of the opportunity for you to be cured. I put sun there as an opportunity to show you my mercy so that you can use it as a means to be happy or satisfied. And you are wasting this opportunity. Yes, it doesn't dissatisfy me. Like when I hear it, I don't say, oh man, now the sun has such a mass. This is unbelievable. I cannot live with it. Yes, I don't say it maybe. But at the same time, when I hear it, I don't say, oh, okay, now I understand why my mother was sick. That is a wasted opportunity. So when I hear sun has such a mass or such a speed, I guess Quran tells me that ask the question, how it helps you, what it tells you about the fact that you will die. So you should ask this question. If you are not asking this question, now you are being a scientist. Like I'm using scientist in a modern use or today's language, whatever. Now you are being a philosopher.
Can I say something? Go.
What?
I've spoken.
My question is going to derail it, I think, so you should get this.
Well, so this just makes me think of, as we were driving here, I was kind of just looking out on the street, and we passed by this daycare. And the name of the daycare was called Secure Future Daycare. And it just felt like a scene from like some dystopic parallel universe, because it was so explicit in what they were advertising. It's, I think it's like a universal thing that every parent wants the best for their child, and what's best for their child is a secure future. And this is starting from the very daycare level of, hey, if you send your child to this daycare, you're securing their future. And so it was, again, just very it wasn't trying to be subtle. It was just saying, hey, here's what you're actually asking for, and we'll fulfill it. And so I was just thinking about it, that the fact that our needs, because, forget children, I want a secure future for myself. Our needs, I feel like our needs on an individual basis, and on an individual basis we make up the collective, I guess, as a society, are so explicit. Like, we're just screaming them out in our actions or in what we do, but we disassociate, I suppose, those needs, like my need for a secure future, with anything that I want to investigate on a serious basis. Anything that I want to investigate scientifically, I guess, or philosophically. That's my actual needs that I may, whether it's a problem with my parent or some sort of relationship, or my worries about the future, that's, I have to kind of leave that alone, isolate it, and then work on the serious problems. Whereas, even though I may not vocalize it, all of my actions, all of my behaviors, even as a society, are just kind of constantly showcasing the actual needs. So I don't know, I just thought it's just an anecdote, but it made me think of, I guess, the contrast between what we vocalize and what we, I guess, take seriously in terms of studying, or what we officially call as searching for in terms of benefit, and then what we exhibit maybe unconsciously or consciously in terms of our human behaviors and our human actions.
So this question might not make sense, but I'm curious, and I think I've thought about it before. So here we're saying that, or here it says that philosophy and science look at beings for themselves. And right now, everything we're saying is, how does the sun solve my problem? How does how does even the creator solve my problem? How do I feel happy because of this? Or we're always just thinking of ourselves. So are we not just looking at our own existence as just for ourselves? Like, am I not looking at myself just for myself? Isn't this also some type of philosophy or science?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to imagine that the universe is a book, then I'm writing maybe on this book, and maybe I should look more to how do I fit in this writing rather than, or how do I fit into the book rather than how do I fulfill myself as a writing. I mean, I don't know, but maybe something like that. Because I think when you're just trying to solve your own problems and just me.
Okay. So I would add, the existence, our existence also refers to something, right? So it's not just refers to myself. So that's what the text is saying. So everything that is created has a reference point that it refers to something else. So even the need is given to me, and the satisfaction is also given by the one who gave me those needs. So there is all those things that we are experiencing, or these things that we are going through. Yeah, they are all referring to the one who is the one in charge of the order, or the one who is in charge of the way the universe is functioning, the existence of everything, including myself and my being, and my feelings, my senses. Everything is referring to the one who gives them existence. So it's not just, like looking at within myself. So I think that I don't feel that's the way. It's just even myself is being referred to the one who gave me existence.
Yeah.
I would just say from a different angle, maybe this is more on a social level, I don't think the problems of the individual, be they existential or not, I don't think they can be isolated from the problems of, the community or society, right? There's a micro macro dynamic in which anything that I reflect as a problem or as a concern is experienced on a more universal level. I think that's a commonality. So I just think that, me figuring out my own problems is in part, proposing solutions that everyone else also needs on a very individual basis. I just think that, anything that is experienced on a collective level is very much so intertwined with everyone's individual problems. I mean, anything that we experience, whether it be, I don't know, like violence or anything else, is just anything that's happening in the world is always directly tied, I would say, to one's internal state. I don't think you can, maybe that's me reading too generously into it, because I am a little bit self-absorbed myself and I like to deal with my own problems more so than the world's, but I think dealing with that means dealing with everything else as well.
Abraham, would you like to give some details or context to your question? Elaborate a little bit more.
Elaborate on it?
I really think it's an important point.
So I don't necessarily mean that like a community problems. I don't really care about the community's problems either. Like, that's not the point I'm addressing. It's just, I feel, and like I said, this might not make sense, but I feel that when you're always just looking, how does this fulfill me? How does this solve my problems? And if you don't follow it, like Awesome said, then, and it's, I guess maybe that's the way to do it, then you're just self-centered around yourself, and then you're just worrying about yourself. And I think, you're like, how does the creator fulfill me too? Like, you're like thinking that way. And you live for yourself, you live for your own means, and the creator is just a means for you to feel happy. I don't know. I feel like that's just you start living for yourself when you just look at how things speak to you, which it doesn't make sense, kind of. But
No, it does. It does. I think it's important
because you have to see how things speak to you too. But
I guess we are trying to solve, let's say, the example of mother being sick. So if somebody comes and says that, yeah, she is sick because of such and such bacteria. So I guess in this context, this would be an explanation, not the sun. But yeah, we would never be satisfied with such an explanation. But if somebody comes and explains about the mercy and sickness, whatever, then maybe we are going to get satisfied partially. But again, back to Abdurrahman's question, it makes sense to say that, but why am I feeling pain out of that? If you ask this question, then you are now starting to think about the problem itself in you. In the first place, why is this, the cognition of this pain is in there. Why is this cognition of pain with me in the first place? Because then there's no explanation for that. Because I'm not taking I out of the picture in terms of saying that it exists with me as if. It's not that I am afflicted with it, I am given it. Then, this is why I guess Abdurrahman's question becomes important. Why am I afflicted with this? What is the relation between this I and this pain over there? Why is it there? Why the I in here? Then, yes, I will need to question the very existence of this I. Because I guess I is a collective thing, so feeling pain in the sickness of a mother is part of this I, which needs to be evaluated in itself, or being happy with the newborn baby is another part of the I, which again needs to be evaluated separately. Both of them are parts of I. So if I try to explain the relation of this I with something else, this is one matter, but the question of why in the first place this I exists over there. I meaning I'm talking about the specific case of the I in the sense that the aspect of me which is sensing pain due to my mother's sickness. So what does it mean? Why do I exist? So I guess in this sense, I need to read myself in a satisfactory way in order not to fall into what Abdurrahman was rightfully asking. I shouldn't be only looking for my relation with everything else, but the relation of I itself, the very existence of I itself. What is it? What is it?
Because I still fail to understand Abdurrahman's point. I should be honest. If anyone here is in this discussion today, not for themselves, I would be really interested to know what makes them be part of this discussion today if it is not for their sake. And if it is not for their sake, then if it is for their sake that they're here, then within that context, it is not really consistent to say some things cannot be not about the self, and self-centeredness is somehow a problematic thing. It's I feel myself as an individual like everyone else. I assume everyone does too, and I am conscious of my existence, and I look at everything as I, and I didn't make myself this I am just I, not by choice. And this is how I am. Now, if somebody comes and tells me I shouldn't concern myself with what I think is good or bad for me, I just would not be able to take it seriously. Why? What else should I take interest in, and why? So we don't have to discuss this, but I really feel that if you for a minute think, why are you in this discussion today? And if you think it is not something to do with you, I would like to know, who are you trying to benefit by being in this discussion?
Well, to some degree, that's going to take care of itself. I mean, no creature ever does anything that it's not motivated to do by some internal force. But we can focus on, like, if you ever wondered what an animal's existence is like, they probably aren't doing things for their own benefit, but they're doing things because they're focused on the outside world. We can focus on projects. We can get wrapped up in pieces of music and be curious about, various questions or mysteries that come up and just need to know, not because we're focused on ourselves, but that's how we work. The mechanism of who we are and how we work is that we need to know, or we want to, hear that piece of music or whatever. And I think the point the author is trying to make is just, like you said, it is kind of a straightforward argument. Don't miss the larger picture. In your meditations, I guess, don't miss the larger picture for the fact. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, I think, assuming I understand your question correctly, I don't know if reading the universe for oneself, connecting everything to myself, I, is necessarily exclusive of reading myself within the universe. So one particular argument could be by reading the universe in such a way where I connect everything to myself, so in a way it's egocentric or self-centric perhaps. I also place myself within a larger puzzle or image or painting or whatever. So I don't know if it's necessarily exclusive, although it does seem like that externally. But I think by, connecting yourself to everything, in a way you place yourself within the larger image. You're not alone in a way. You read yourself for what you extract the message from yourself by putting yourself within a larger context. Otherwise, if you isolate yourself within the universe, then I think that larger picture becomes impossible to see.
That's interesting. Like, from one aspect, yes, it sounds like as if when we talk about I or myself or my sake, it sounds like there's something wrong with this idea. But it's also interesting that when you read Quran, they are also like almost all, since a speech to me, like it talks about me as well. Like it says, don't you think, don't you see, don't you want to benefit, or it's something neither benefit you nor harm you. Like you is always in the kind of like a center. It's a speech directed to you, right? Even like when the Quran says the Creator is all-seeing, all-wise, and so on, there's one aspect, yes, looking at the Creator, but there's one aspect still looking at me, which attracts my attention. Like, oh, he's all-seeing, meaning whatever being created in my life is not random. Like he sees everything, he has power on everything, and so on. So it's there, the speech is there to give me a net of security, kind of. So, like I ask, then what is the problem? Like Quran also use and want me follow such a path, like when you look at the sun, see it as a lamp put there for you. The Quran asked me to see it like this. He said, the sun as a lamp. At least as an initial step, right? Maybe in the next step, we will reach this we part, right? It will become about the Creator. But as a first step, Quran asked me, like, look at the sun and see it as a lamp. So obviously, lamp is not there for like a Creator, like again at the first level. Once I see it as an art, right? Then I say, okay, art is also looking at the artist as well. So it becomes about the artist. And we see the same thing with Nursi's writing. He starts with the human condition, your feelings, human feelings, like it's about you. And then occasionally he reaches to everything is being art, and then there's an artist behind it, and it becomes about the artist, which again satisfies you. So when even it is about the creator, you are not disconnected. So you don't take the creator as a philosopher or scientist would take, for instance. So just as a reminder, what I said last week, like we shouldn't think that a scientist or a philosopher is limited by materialism. No. They can even study God. But what happened if they were to study God, for instance? It would be disconnected from you. From a philosophical or scientific perspective, the God would be there by itself, has some properties, some features that they would study, how it relates to other things and so forth, but you will be disconnected. It will be external. But Quran says, no, everything must be internal. Everything must be connected to you. Start from yourself. Start with yourself at the center. Put yourself at the center and study universe in that context. I guess one issue I see such like the talks or such claims we do, including myself, when we talk about I, for instance, or when we talk about myself, I suspect that we're using a secular term. Like I exists by itself, and we, like when you say, for instance, it's all about the me, right? Rightfully. So I guess the problem is there, because in this question or in these claims that we make, we used to think that I, as Yusuf was saying, as something independent, existing by itself, and then shaping everything else by this independent entity. If you take it this way, yes, it's a problematic. It takes you all these isms. But I guess when Quran talks about you or I or myself, whatever, it's using a different language. It's defining I as something created, as itself being an artful object, itself again looking at the creator. Yes, it is about you. You are there in the universe to benefit yourself, quote unquote, but not in a way, in a world will, like in a way that the world would use the same phrase, in which I is considered being there for itself, by itself. Like for instance, an evolutionary perspective will tell you, like I exist, and I came to this point after all these evolutions so that I can survive, and I should look for benefit for myself so that I can survive. It's apparently the same thing, right? What I'm saying here, like you should look at the sun for your sake, but I guess there's a difference between these two. In one of them, I see universe, including myself, as being created. And I look for the satisfaction in this created universe, in which the satisfaction itself as well is a created thing. So even when I look at myself, I'm looking to my creator. I'm relying on my creator. So I'm not striving for the satisfaction. I'm receiving the satisfaction. There was someone.
Yeah, so, I just want to, I agree with you. I mean, it's a maybe different subject, but I think, I feel I need to be mindful that insofar as I exist here in this world, whether I say I'm made to exist or I exist, whether something is good or problematic, I feel, for me personally, it's important to bring it back to myself and say, why is it problematic? Why is nationalism or evolution or I being independent problematic? And we want to jump always, we want to rush to kind of conclude, yes, it is obviously problematic. Yes, it's problematic. Let's try to justify it somehow. It's problematic. And, what happens is it's not settled in myself. I'm not convinced because I am a mind. I have a akal, or however you want to say it. It needs the heart, whatever you call it. It needs to be convinced that it actually is a problem, not because everyone else says so, not because if I don't agree it's a problem, I have something, not because of some fear or some irrational commitment. As a human being, with my capacities that I have, which I may conclude are given or are not mine, but it is the only measure I have. My consciousness is the only tool in my hand with which I can detect good or bad, or benefit or harm. And it has to be grounded in, in myself. Otherwise, it is not actually harmful. Until I feel really it is harmful, it is not harmful. The whole world can tell me it's harmful. But until I feel it, I cannot witness it. I cannot approve it. My heart is not convinced. Anything that is then built on that claim will be to that degree not convincing, not satisfying. So I think there is no going around from this point that whatever is beneficial or harmful, it is beneficial or harmful to me in this world. And this is how I really feel as a human being. And when I read Revelation, it confirms. And when I read, it says whatever is good for you, and whatever bad you do is bad for you. And I say, yeah, that is how this is. There is nothing that is bad because, communism is not bad to me really because so many people died. But because so many people dying in that way is not acceptable to me. It all comes, anything you talk about comes back to myself. It's my perspective, and there's just no need to ignore it. And there's a tendency among traditional religious discourse to say no to the world. The world is bad, and so I is bad. Let's say we. This doesn't belong to me, it belongs to God. It doesn't belong to me, it belongs to God. And you keep saying this, but if I am not convinced that it is not good for me to claim ownership of it, not because God gets angry or some text says it, but I witness that it is not good for me, so that I choose not to own it as by way of looking out for my benefit, which is the definition of akal. A person who's rational, has akal, is the one defined as who knows what is good and chooses it, and knows what is harm and turns away from it. So this is how I experience my reality. And, I don't think anyone disagrees with it. The complications come with different senses of using the I and self-centeredness. And so, but in any case, even self-centeredness is bad, is something, not because Birkan says or Nursi says, but if I think it is good, I should try to live and see whether it is good or not. And if I think self-centeredness is not good, I should live nonsense self-centered and see how I feel. Again, it will be still about me, how I will feel. And if I say, simply being non-self-centered solves the problem for someone, they should live it. It doesn't solve the problem for me. To negate myself doesn't solve the problem for me. Because why should I do that? Why was the self there? Where did the self come from? On what basis should I start to try to negate it or override it with concern for other things or other people or the universe? Why? So I should ask those questions. And again, it is in search of those answers to those questions that I come to revelation, because I've concluded that Birkan cannot answer my question or Abdul Rahman cannot. So I'm trying to ask my creator if he seems to be the best source. And when I come to him, then I start to, what Birkan was talking about, from there, revelation starts to say, well, it's not self-centeredness that's the problem. It is self-centeredness disconnected from its maker that is the source of the problem. So even when you become non-self-centered, if you remain disconnected from the source of the self, even non-self-centeredness will not help you. You can serve the universe and you can be concerned about other than yourself, and that would be that. If that satisfies you, go ahead, but it doesn't satisfy me.
So my understanding is then, from what Farah said, maybe just a little bit of paraphrasing for myself, if you do not consider it truly a problem for you, do not try to pretend as if you are solving the problem. Because I wouldn't say that it's not a problem for me. If I'm not aware of the problem truly, still it's a problem for me from a quote-unquote objective sense of word. I mean, I might be cancer right now, but me not being aware of it doesn't make it a problem for me objectively. But from where I am standing, yeah, I'm not really aware of it, so I'm not concerned about it. But hypothetically, if I start being worried about what if I would be cancer, whatever, then I guess Faraz is saying that if you are not aware of the fact that you are cancer, then don't pretend as if you are trying to solve this. So once make sure that you are cancer, then start thinking about it. Do not say that, oh yeah, we should solve the problem of cancer in general, or in specific, if it comes to me, I should solve it. So I guess in this sense, this is sort of criticism that I'm taking from Faraz, saying that first make sure that what you are speaking is truly your problem, then start being concerned about that problem. Otherwise, I guess, because other than that, at least what was being spoken hypothetically makes sense to me, I mean in general, not only for Faraz, in general. But the only criticism that I am seeing in there from Faraz is, are you really concerned about you yourself, or how much you are concerned about me part of it? Is it like, because they said that I'm going to burn in hellfire if I say me, so I shouldn't be saying me. Is this the concern that you're trying to avoid? Or is it really that reading yourself just for the sake of yourself, and you're concerned with that, and then you're trying to find a solution for that? So my understanding, as far as get the glimpse or feeling that we are falling into the first category, not in the second one. But if somehow you end up finding yourself in the second category, then I would think that, yes, you are more than welcome to now start questioning and get the answer.
There's one comment. Oh, it's a long comment, so I will read it, inshallah. Mohammed Said, he says, I think the reason of our satisfaction comes from the perspective that the beings in the universe reveal the qualities of their maker. So I'm also interpreting simultaneously. So he's saying that our satisfactions comes from reading universe as manifestation of the maker. So he continues, so I think comfort of heart and mind is possible only when this perspective is at work. On the other hand, the relationship between the things and within the things cannot be taken as the source of the things themselves. That's not possible to believe in. That's not possible to believe in. Because of this impossibility, human qualities cannot find comfort in it. Not because of its discomfort, I try to distance myself from it, but because it does not make sense. It has no reality within my realm. Nothing can make itself. How come the universe can be assumed as the product of itself? I think the author confirms the way of Quranic approach to universe, not because Quran says so, but it makes sense to everyone. Faraz adds, he says, to me, discomfort and dissatisfaction is the same as it does not make sense. So it says, discomfort and dissatisfaction is same for me, Faraz says, as it doesn't make sense. Rest, I agree with you, and Muhammad Said says exactly. So I guess that was enough of reading. We have 5 minutes. So anyone wants to make a summary or concluding remark, he is more than welcome. If you have some questions in mind that we can study next week, again, you are welcome. Other than that, I'm just looking at people. One people. Abdurrahman, are you satisfied with the discussion? So, okay, Conley, go ahead, please.
Well, as far as there's been a couple of questions I've been wanting to ask through the whole discussion. It's come up a number of times, and maybe for another for future thought or anything. But I did want to present the idea that there is no such thing as chance. I'm sure that's a concept with which everybody's familiar. But the idea that things, the idea that the universe or that things are put in order by chance, I don't really understand what that even means underneath. When you look at a thing that we describe through statistics, you find there are deterministic principles at work on a granular level. So, I just can't see chance anywhere in the universe. That's one idea. There was another one that just slipped my mind. Anyway, I guess I'll just leave it there.
Jazakallah khair. Anyone else? Any concluding remarks? Because I guess we can safely end the 19 words this week.
I think one final comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we can
for the very last minute. Okay. Just I guess what I extracted a small portion of it in a nutshell is that, perhaps there's two ways of reading the universe for oneself. And from what I've gathered, one way is that I read it for myself, or I see the way I can benefit from it, but it's in a way where it doesn't acknowledge my existential problems in my personal life. So if my mother is sick, or if my friend, whatever personal problems I may have. And the other way, so that in that case, I see, how can I benefit from the sun? Well, I have crops, or I need a tan, or I need vitamin D, or whatever the case is, right? You benefit in that sense, but it doesn't necessarily address my personal issues. And then the second way of approaching it is, again, it's how does the sun benefit me, but rather than the sun gives me X, Y, or Z, the sun is made to give me X, Y, or Z, and then in which case I put it in a totally different framework where the sun refers to something else and I refer to something else as well. In which case then I can try to extract some sort of message within my relationship with the sun that I can then use to deal with my existential problems in my own personal life.
I guess it was a good concluding remark, summary. Thank you.
Yes, it's unbelievable how everything ties to this source, like all the relationships we have with the sun, the moon, the atmosphere, the environment, to human beings, to animals, plants, trees. It all refers to something. That relationship also, and every creation also refers to a source. I find that amazing, actually, how that ties in, that we all are related through that particular source. Otherwise, nothing is possible. None of these relations or nothing in the universe, if it's not tied to that single source.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. الفاتحة.